Be sure to follow my Twitch over at twitch.tv/Daltnix. Thank you. With the final shape rapidly approaching, coming out next week at the recording of this video, I figured it was about time we go over 9 builds that I would highly recommend you have in your arsenal for the new DLC for PvP. I have 3 Hunter builds, 3 Warlock builds, and 3 Titan builds, so no matter what class you're playing, you will have a build to run, whether you're grinding comp or just playing quick play with friends. Now, Prismatic is the new class that is going to be releasing. I'm not going to be covering any Prismatic builds just because I want to get my hands on those classes before I really recommend certain builds, and there will be plenty of those on the channel once the DLC drops. But this will just be 9 builds of the current classes that we currently have. So we just have 3 different builds for all the different classes. Without further ado, let's get into it. All right, we're going to start off very, very strong here. Starting off with the Brood Weaver. This is the Strand Warlock. And anybody who's been following my channel for even a little bit knows that I am a Brood Weaver main, and I think this class is so underrated. It is super, super strong. But starting off with the aspects, Weave Walk. This is the bread and butter of the Strand Warlock kit and the thing that makes it so strong. So Weave Walk makes it so you have an in-air dodge, and when you use this in-air dodge, you go into this invisible ghost-like state, and while you're in this state, you'll spawn a threadling every 0.5 seconds that lurches onto you, as well as gives you 90% damage reduction. Though you can't shoot in this mode, it's still very, very strong. You can pretty much just disengage anytime you want, and as well as having crazy offensive capabilities of always having at least 3 to 4 threadlings on top of you to help with 1v1s. And the way that you activate this ability is it will drain your melee as you have it active, and we'll talk about the melee real quick here. The melee is Arcane Needle. You're almost never really going to use it because these melees kind of suck, if I'm being honest with you, but you have 3 charges. And the way that the charges work is when you have one fully charged, it will lower the cooldown of the next one. So you really need to focus on managing your cooldowns. Try to make sure you keep at least 1 charge so it can keep your cooldowns like consistently lower and lower. If you have 1 to 2, it makes it so your melee cooldowns come up very, very fast, especially if you're running 9 to 10 strength, which I highly recommend for this build, and make it so you can pretty much have a get out of jail free card whenever you want. The second aspect we're going to be running is Weaver's Call. This makes it so when you cast a rift, it will send out 3 threadlings. This is a fantastic aspect. It makes it so nobody can really push you, and you can also activate it outside of your Weave Walk. So you can pop your Weave Walk, so you can go around the corner, pop your rift, and you can send out the 3 threadlings that cast from Weaver's Call, as well as you can send out the other threadlings that are attached onto you because of your Weave Walk, and it pretty much just nukes anybody that comes around a corner. The amount of times I get somebody with this is crazy. Super, super strong. For your grenade, I'd recommend having Threadling Grenade, but if you'd like a little bit more movement in your kit and you think you have enough Threadlings, the Grapple Grenade works as well. I think it really just depends on the player for which one you want. I personally prefer the Threadling Grenade. And for your fragments, you're going to run Thread of Evolution because it will buff off the damage of your Threadlings as well as increase the travel distance of them. Just makes them overall better and smart, and with the amount of Threadlings you're going to be spamming with this build, definitely a needed pick. Then I would recommend Thread of Generation to get grenade energy anytime you do damage. Overall, just helps you get your Threadling Grenade back to help, spam more, or your Grapple Grenade, whatever one you choose. And then your third fragment is more of a user's pick. I personally like Thread of Binding because it gives you a little extra oomph to your super, as well as gives you 10 resilience, which is overall really nice. But if you don't care about that, you could use Thread of Warding, which will give you Woven Mail, which will help you be even more tankier anytime you pick up an Orb of Power. Or if you are using a Strand weapon, I recommend Thread of Rebirth, just to get even more Threadlings on the field anytime you get an elimination with your Strand weapons. And the exotic of choice for this build that I would highly recommend is I Have Another World. What this exotic does is it will mark priority targets, which is great, but the main thing that we're going to be using is it will improve our regeneration speed of our grenade and melee and rift by 50%, making it so we can just get even more ability spam and make it so we can have our melee up even faster. And overall, one of the strongest picks for this build. But for whatever reason, if you do not want to use I Have Another World, I think Ophidian Aspects and Transversive Steps work great for this build as well. You just need to manage your melee cooldowns just a little bit better. If you'd like to see a full edited guide on this particular class, I actually have one up on the channel. The link will be down in the description if you'd like to check that out, if you are at all interested in this build. And for this build, I strongly recommend building into recovery, then strength, trying to get at least 7 resilience, and then putting the rest into your discipline. So starting off with our second build, the Shadebinder. This is a stupidly strong Warlock class. In my honest opinion, this is one of the strongest classes, if not the strongest class in the game, if used correctly. This pretty much makes it so you can take over a game or shut anyone down with minimal effort, if I'm being honest with you. Our first aspect is Frost Pulse. This will send out a shockwave anytime you cast a rift that will freeze any targets that are close to you, as well as give you increased melee lunge distance whenever you freeze someone, just making it a lot easier to clean them up. Very strong aspect, making it so you pretty much have a mini shotgun in your back pocket. Fun little tip, if you use Empowering Rift, it will also send out the animation a little bit faster, but for most players, I would still recommend just a Healing Rift. But overall, it's just an aspect that I think most Stasis Warlocks don't utilize as much as they really should, because it is definitely one of the strongest abilities in the Stasis Warlock's kit, just being able to prevent anybody from pushing you, as well as being able to sometimes, if you know the enemy doesn't have a shotgun, you can essentially just run at them and throw a rift out and just melee them. Super strong and very memeable. The second aspect we're going to be running is Ice Flare Bolts. This makes it so whenever you shatter a frozen target, it will send out little Ice Seekers, essentially just being a cold snap grenade that will freeze other targets. This is the thing that makes it so you can just wipe entire teams with ease, just from one grenade or one Frost Pulse. Speaking of grenades, we're going to be using the cold snap grenade with our exotic of choice, Osmiomancy Gloves. Osmiomancy essentially gives you a second grenade, as well as increases the tracking of these grenades to an absurd level, as well as increasing the distance of them, making it so these grenades are super strong. If anybody pushes you, you can throw it at your feet, or you can just throw it in the direction of them. I've seen some crazy tracking from these grenades. They could be a little inconsistent sometimes, but overall still just such a crazy grenade with the Osmiomancy Gloves. I want to talk about the melee for a second, because the melee, you can only pick one, and that is Penumbral Blast, but this is the strongest ability in the entire kit, if I'm being honest with you, if you know how to use it, aka you can aim it. Because it is a point and click and you can kind of aim it, it makes it so any inconsistencies is gone. With the cold snaps, they're a little inconsistent, they have to track and you just have to hope, but with Penumbral Blast, there's no real counter. When you're playing against better players, they can typically avoid your cold snaps or make it so they're not as effective, but Penumbral Blast, the fact that you can just immediately jiggle peek out and fire it at somebody, or jump at somebody and fire it at them, just makes it so there's no real counterplay if using this correctly. I think you need to lean into Penumbral Blast a lot more than a lot of Shadebinders do. I feel like most of them just really heavily rely on their grenades, but I think the Rift and the Penumbral Blast are the real winner of this. The grenades are fantastic, but you can definitely counter them. With the Rift and the melee, it is very hard to counter. Whisper Hedrons is our first fragment, dramatically increasing our weapon stability, weapon aim assist, weapon airborne effectiveness, mobility, resilience, and recovery after freezing a target. With this build, you should be freezing people non-stop, so you should be having this buff up almost all the time, and it just makes your weapons feel buttery smooth, as well as getting those bonus to your stats. Super strong. Whisper of Torment is up next. This one just makes it so when you get shot at, you get more grenade energy. Having more cold snaps in your kit is always fantastic. Then Whisper of Fissures will make it so you get increased burst and size of your stasis explosions or shatters. And this just makes it so you can get some crazy double and triple kills if people are close together. And you can even take out targets who didn't even get frozen with one person who got frozen. This is just a very good consistency adding fragment. And then lastly, we're using Whisper of Rending. With less special ammo being available, it is super strong having your primary weapon do more damage to frozen targets. Back in the day when you could have a ton of sniper ammo or a ton of slug shotgun ammo or Ariana's Vow ammo, whatever you were using, it was very easy to free somebody and clean them up with a snipe from long range. But now there's a little less sniper ammo, so unless if you're super reserved with your special ammo, it's always nice having your primary weapon do more damage to frozen targets, because a lot of times you'll freeze somebody with a primary and you don't really do that much damage. You'll get them weak, but you'll sometimes not get the cleanup. Where now you can freeze a target, and if you're using something like a pulse rifle or something, you'll be able to get them down before they get unfrozen almost every single time. Very underrated stasis fragment, if I'm gonna be honest. Overall, Shadebinder is super strong. I highly recommend you build into recovery, then discipline, and then try to get at least 7 resil, and then honestly, I'd put the rest into strength. And lastly, our final Warlock build is gonna be Dawnblade, the Solar Warlock. This class has always been super strong in the game, and this is no exception even with this patch. Though Well of Radiance is getting a bit of a nerf, I still think it will be very strong, but even if I'm wrong, Dawnblade is a fantastic super as well. So starting off with our aspects, we're going to be running Icarus Dash as your main one. This is an air move that will make it so you can move around the map really fast, as well as having the ability to dodge out of certain situations and get around corners when you're in 1v1s. One of the best abilities in the game, honestly, with the amount of speed that you can get from this ability as well as everything else. Just an easy no-brainer pick. Then our second aspect, it's a little bit of a user's choice if I'm being honest with you. Personally, I like Heat Rises because I like to jump around in the air a lot. You can consume your grenade to just float around indefinitely and have crazy amount of AE. But even if you don't eat your grenade, just being able to get +20 to AE and jump around with your gun, like actually being able to aim, is super strong. But if you don't really care to jump around a whole lot, Touch of Flame is a fantastic pick as well. It buffs up your grenades, making it so your healing grenades will heal restoration ×2, very strong in that. Your Firebolt grenades will be a lot more lethal, having an increased radius, as well as being able to hit more targets. And then Fusion grenades will explode twice, not quite taking someone out, but we'll leave them one shot, or if they're even a little bit weak, being able to take them out. So no matter what grenade you choose, very strong in that regard. But like I said, I personally prefer E-Rises, just really depends on the player. The fragments we're going to be using is Ember of Torches, making it so we can get Radiant anytime we hit a melee ability. With the Celestial Fire or the Snap melee, very strong, very easy to hit with the ranged melee, making it so you can get Radiant pretty frequently. I personally prefer Celestial Fire, but a lot of people like to Snap skate, so the Snap is there as well. Ember of Singeing is going to be up next, giving you class ability energy whenever you scorch a target. Overall, you hit a melee, you'll get your Rift back a lot quicker, just really, really nice. Then we'll get Ember of Searing, which defeating scorched targets will give you melee energy. So we can kind of loop that. We hit them with our melee, it scorches them, we take them out, get some melee energy back, as well as some class ability energy back with Searing. Then for our last fragment, it depends on what you're using. If you're going to use the Daybreak Super and not use Well, Ember of Beaming is fantastic, just making it so your swords are a little easier to hit and have some crazy target acquisition, as well as gives you a nice little bump to intellect. But if you're going to be using Well, or you just don't want that extra target acquisition, Ember of Solace is the best fragment you can be running as well, making it so your Radiant and Restoration effects have an increased duration. This works great, obviously, with your melee being able to give you Radiant, as well as if you're running healing grenades, making it so you can get even more restoration. And the exotic choices that I recommend for this build is you're going to either want to use Transversive Step or Ophidian Aspects. They're both really, really strong, and they bring out more of the kit of the Dawnblade. Transversive Step just gives you more sprint speed, slide distance, all that fun stuff, which adds even more movement to the movement-based class. And then Ophidian Aspects just makes your weapons feel really, really good, giving you a bunch of handling and reload bonuses, as well as giving you a little extra airborne effectiveness. Pairs perfectly well with Heat Rises. I think these are the two strongest exotics you can be running with this class. And overall, Dawnblade is one of the strongest classes in the game, and though Well is getting nerfed, I still think this class is going to be fantastic. Even if people have to run Daybreak, Daybreak is still a fantastic super in its own right, but I don't think the nerfs are going to be enough to downright kill Well. I think you just need to be a little bit smarter with it. You're not going to be able to just pop it in the middle of the open and be able to tank 3 people shooting at you like you can kind of do now, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And then for this build, I would recommend building into Recovery, then Discipline, and then get at least 70 Resilience because it's great for the meta, then dumping the rest of the stuff into Intellect. If you are enjoying the video, please remember to like and subscribe, as it does help out with the channel a lot. I plan on covering tons of different new builds when the new DLC drops, including prismatic ones. Thank you guys so much, and enjoy the rest of the builds. All right, on to our first Hunter build. We're going to be running the Revenant class, and this class is getting a bit of a buff coming into the new DLC, along with every other Stasis class. And this is one of my favorite classes already to run, so I'm really happy to see it get a little bit of a buff. So our first aspect that we're going to be running is Touch of Winter. This will enhance your grenades, whatever one you're going to want to use. Personally, for this build, I like to use Dustfield grenades. This will increase the radius as well as make it so there's a small stasis crystal in the middle. Very, very strong. So as I said, we're going to be running a Dustfield grenade. Dustfield grenades are one of the most underrated grenades in the entire game, in my honest opinion. If you throw this on somebody, it makes so you pretty much just win the gunfight because they're slowed, they get increased flinch because they're slowed, and just the ability to shut down entire areas with one grenade is super, super good. I love using Dustfield grenades on smaller maps or more confined maps. You can just hold down areas so well with them. And our second aspect we're going to be running is Grim Harvest. This aspect makes it so when you defeat slowed or frozen combatants, it will create a stasis shard. And right now, this is kind of a whatever fragment, just because the stasis shards don't really do a whole lot. They give you a bit of melee energy back, or you can use certain fragments to get some abilities from them. But it's just like, overall, they're not the greatest, if I'm being honest with you. But Bungie's actually changing it so in the new DLC, these stasis crystals will actually give you frost armor. Now, frost armor is going to give you a damage reduction. It's going to be 2% per stack that you get, which overall more damage reduction in PvP just helps you stay alive. And with the amount of people you're going to be slowing with this build, you're going to be able to get a lot of stasis shards. So our first fragment that we're going to be running is Whisper of Durance. This increases your slows, just making it last a ridiculously long time, as well as Whisper of Durance will increase the duration of your Dustfield grenades from 8 seconds to 11 or 12 seconds, if I'm being honest, I don't remember. But overall, it is just a fantastic pick. The slow just lasting a little bit longer on players is very powerful, making it easier to close the gap from them, making it so they can't get away, and just a no-brainer pick for a fragment. The second fragment we're going to be running is Whisper of Torment, making it so when you get shot, you just get your grenade back. Just overall a fantastic pick to get your Dustfield grenades back. Then we're going to be looking at Whisper of Chains. Now, currently, this gives you a damage reduction when you're close to frozen or stasis crystals, as well as gives you +10 to recovery. And they're actually changing it with all this frost armor changes to now it's going to grant a chance to give you a stasis shard when you defeat a target while you have frost armor equipped. And that overall just helps keep the frost armor ability going, as well as help you get more stacks so you can get more damage. We're going to be running Whisper of Shards. This will give us a temporary boost to our grenade recharge rate whenever we destroy a stasis crystal. Anytime we throw a dust field grenade, we're going to be destroying that little crystal in the middle, just helping get our grenades that much more. The last one we're going to be running is Whisper of Conduction. Now, not only does this give you a plus 10 to resilience and intellect, getting 20 bonus stats is fantastic. It will make it so any stasis shards we create will start tracking towards us, making it so we don't need to necessarily fly in super hard to get them for our frost armor. Overall, Stasis Hunter is a fantastic pick and honestly one of my favorite subclasses in the game, and I truly believe it is not used enough, and being able to get some damage reduction to help for some of the survivability in the next patch is just going to make this overall even better. Renewal Grasp is a very strong pick nowadays because now it's going to give you frost armor whenever you stand inside your dust field, and every second or so will give you another stack. Super strong. Or you can use Frosties if you want to spam your abilities even more. Personally, right now, I prefer Frosties, but into the new update, I'm very curious to see how good new Renewal Grasps is really going to be. For this build, I really recommend you build into Recovery, then Discipline, and then dumping everything else into Mobility, trying to get it as high as you can. Our second hunter build is going to be Strand Hunter. The Thread Learner is very strong, though the Grapple build is getting nerfed. That is not the one we are going to be talking about today. Today we are going to be talking about our Threaded Spectre build. And that is the first aspect that we're going to be running today. The Threaded Spectre, when you dodge or use your class ability, it will leave this little clone behind. Enemies get close, it will explode, doing damage, and will release 3 Threadlings. Or you can shoot it as well, and it will detonate early and release the Threadlings either way. It will also ping on the enemy radar. This was very strong a season ago, but then it got nerfed a little bit, but I still think this build is by far one of the best in the game. The Threaded Spectre just makes it very hard for enemies to push you, as well as makes some great offensive capabilities if you're ever in some sort of shoddy battle, and is very strong if you use the melee, because the melee will hit the Threaded Spectre and then bounce off the Spectre and hit enemies, so it will do a decent amount of damage in that way, as well as the Threadlings chasing people down, doing more damage that way. Overall, just a very strong aspect. And then the radar pings are very valuable as well, making it so enemies have to think a little bit about whether it's you or the Threaded Spectre. Our second aspect we're going to be running is Widow's Silk. This will give you an additional grenade. Our grenade that we're going to be using is the Threadling Grenade. So we'll have 2 Threadling Grenades, being able to spam them out, throw them at people, just making for even more Threadling goodness. Our first fragment we're going to be running is Thread of Ascent. Activating your grenade ability, which we're going to have 2 of, will reload your equipped weapon, as well as give you bonus airborne effectiveness and handling, which is great, as well as giving you 10 mobility, and mobility on hunters, you can never go wrong with that. Then we're going to have Thread of Generation, making it anytime we do damage, we'll get more grenade energy back, making it so we don't need to build the most into our discipline to get our constant grenades back. Thread of Binding is our next pick, giving you 10 resilience, which is super good, making the super a little more lethal. Anything to make the super a little bit better is a great pick in my honest opinion, just because the super isn't the greatest. It can be very inconsistent, but this makes it so whenever you hit somebody, it will cause an explosion, and the amount of times that you get a lot of eliminations with this explosion is just super good. Then lastly, the most important one, Thread of Evolution. This makes it so your Threadlings travel further and deal increased damage, seeing as this is all about throwing out Threadlings with your clone and your grenade. Just a super strong pick. The exotic choice we currently use right now is 6 Coyote. 6 Coyote gives you a second dodge charge, making it so you can spam your Threaded Spectre even more. Bungie actually has a new exotic coming out called Balance of Power. This exotic makes it so your Threaded Spectre has an increased duration and durability, and damaging it will also release additional Threadlings. It can release up to 2 Threadlings whenever you damage it, as well as whenever you're near your Threaded Spectre, you do not appear on radar. So as long as you're within like 10 to 15 meters or something like that, you will not show up on radar. Your Threaded Spectre will, but you will not. And it can be very good for baiting out teammates. I think this is going to be a very strong pick in my honest opinion, and I cannot wait to give it a try. But it depends on what you're looking for. I think there's 2 different variants. If you want to spam more and use your Threaded Spectres a little bit more aggressively, I think 6 Coyote is still arguably going to be better. But Balance of Power will make it so you can play a lot more defensively with it, and having additional Threadlings is also super nice as well. So I think it will really depend on the playstyle of the player, of which one you will like, but I think both these builds will be very strong no matter what exotic you use. I really recommend for this build, you build into Recovery and Mobility, and then putting the rest into Discipline to help with your grenades. Then our last hunter build is going to be a gunslinger build, and honestly I think this build has a lot of flexibility depending on the type of player you are. The aspects we're going to be running is On Your Mark, which is such a good aspect. I don't think people talk about it enough, but Precision Final Blows will grant you and nearby allies increased handling and reload speed for a short duration, and whenever you activate your class ability, it will give you max stack of this. It's honestly like having a mini Dragon Shadow in your aspects. It's not quite as potent, it's still very strong. Having those increased stats on bulkier weapons is great, and always having more handling is never a bad thing. Overall, such an underrated aspect in my honest opinion. The next aspect we're going to be running is Knock 'em Down. This will give you certain buffs depending on what super you're using, which this will just give you increased buffs to your super depending on which one you're using. Deadshot will have some damage reduction, Marksman Golden Gun will have increased duration, Blade Barrage will launch out more knives. Personally, for 3v3, I prefer Blade Barrage, and then for 6v6, I prefer one of the two Golden Guns. It depends on what I'm going for. If I'm going for crazy kill feeds, trying to go for a 7 column, then I'll use the 6-shooter. If I'm going for a more consistency, taking out supers and a Golden Gun that lasts a very long time, I'll be going with Deadshot. For your grenades, honestly, they're all very good. Healing Grenade's good, Trip Mine's good. Swarm Grenades are actually getting a buff, so we'll see how good they are. Maybe they'll be very good in the buff. Really depends on the player. I personally like Healing Grenades. And your knife, honestly, they're all very good. A lot of people like the weighted throwing knife just because it's a one-shot. Proximity knife is very easy to hit. Knife Trick, the 3 knives are very strong, honestly, if you can get really good at hitting all 3 of them. And then Lightweight Throwing Knife is actually getting a bit of a buff in the new DLC, making it so you'll get 2 of them. And Lightweight Throwing Knives, don't sleep on them. I really recommend you give them a try. They have some crazy hitbox and do a considerable amount of damage. For our fragments, we're going to be running Ember of Torches, making it so we can get Radiant whenever we hit a melee ability. Even with a Lightweight Throwing Knife, this is still kind of nice, just in case if you hit a body. Either way, it'll make it so you get Radiant. This also makes it so anytime you get a melee elimination, because you'll be Radiant with the Knock 'em Down fragment, it will essentially just give you your knife back, overall making it so you can have a very fun melee oriented loop. Then the next fragment we're going to be running is Ember of Beams, making it so our Golden Gun or our Blade Barrage has increased target acquisition, just making it a little easier to hit. Very strong pick. Then Ember of Combustion will make it so when we get a final blow with our super, it will cause the targets to ignite and create a fire sprite, as well as giving +10 to strength. And then for our 4th fragment, we're going to run Ember of Solace, making it so our Radiant and Restoration effects last even longer. Overall, just fantastic, especially if you're using a Healing Grenade. And then for the last fragment, personally, it really depends on what you're running. If you're using stuff that uses Scorches, such as like Trip Mines or the 3 knives, then maybe you use Ember of Ashes to get more Scorch. But if you're using Healing Grenades or one of the knives that doesn't really care that much about Scorch, I would personally just use a fragment that gives you an extra stat. And my favorite exotics to run with this build are honestly a lot of the neutral game exotics, such as Wormhusk, Stompies, or Frosties. Honestly, these are my top 3 exotics. I think it really just depends on the player. For this build, I would highly recommend building into your recovery, then your mobility, and then dumping the rest into intellect. Now on to our first Titan build. We are going to be looking at the Behemoth, the Stasis Titan. This has not been very meta for a very long time, but I think with the new buffs that we are getting to Stasis, it is going to be a stupidly strong build. With the amount of damage reduction you're going to be able to get with this build and how easy it's going to be able to maintain, I'm actually a little scared for this one, if I'm being honest. So our first aspect is going to be Tectonic Harvest. This makes it so whenever you shatter a stasis crystal, it will give you stasis shards, as well as getting a nice little buff in the new DLC, making it so when you destroy frozen targets, it will also give you a stasis shard. And as we talked about a little bit earlier, stasis shards are going to make it so you can get frost armor, and frost armor gives you damage reduction, 2% per stack that you can get. Our second aspect is going to be Hall of the Storm. This makes it so when you slide, you can use your melee ability and it will send out ice crystals. These will freeze targets. The main reason we're going to be using this is, yes, it has some nice offensive capabilities. Overall, it's just going to be great to get more stasis crystals to get us more frost armor. Our grenade that we're going to be using, Glacial Grenade. Again, we're going to be destroying it so we can get our stasis shards, making it very easy to get frost armor. Whisper of Shards, making it so we will get a boost grenade recharge rate whenever we shatter crystals. We're going to be doing it all the time, making it so we can get our glacial grenade back even quicker and making it so we can have it up almost all the time. Whisper of Rime is up next, so Bungie is completely reworking this one, making it so your frost armor will last longer, as well as being able to get more stacks. Frost armor normally is going to cap out at 5 stacks and last 9 seconds, but with this one it can last up to 13 seconds and 8 stacks, making it so if you have 8 stacks you can get a 16% damage reduction, which is kind of crazy if we're being honest. Whisper of Chains is up next, and as we talked about earlier, reworking it, making it so whenever you have frost armor, whenever you defeat a target, they have a chance of dropping a stasis shard. We should almost have frost armor all the time with this build. Then lastly, Whisper of Conduction, making it so our stasis shards track to us. For the most part, they should be pretty close, but this one gives it a crazy amount of stats and just overall just adds an extra ease of use to the build. And for our exotic of choice, we're going to be running Hoarfrost Z, making it so whenever we use our barricade, it will essentially turn into a glacier grenade. Overall, just making even more stasis crystals. So we can have stasis crystals from our melee, stasis crystal from our class ability, and then obviously from our glacier grenade. Making it so we'll always have an ability up to get frost armor and have damage reduction. And this build just gets even stronger when you have more people running it. it's actually kind of a viable build, especially on smaller maps, to have 2 or 3 Stasis Titans just spamming abilities. This build gets even stronger when you build your mods and weapons out to it. Most of the time, mods and PvP don't really matter too much because you can't really build craft a whole lot. There are certain things you can do, but for the most part, you just put on your targeting mods, your unflinching mods. But for this one, you're going to want to run specific mods. You're going to want to run Elemental Charge on your boots, because that makes it so anytime you pick up a Stasis Crystal, you have a chance of getting an armor charge. For the amount of Stasis Crystals you're going to be dropping, you're almost always going to have at least 1 armor charge, making it so you can activate your 2 surge mods depending on what weapon you're using. And then you're also going to be wanting to use a weapon with collected action. Collected action isn't a very good perk most of the time, but for this specific build, it's legendary. Collected action makes it so whenever you pick up a Stasis shard, it will give you a weapon bonus for that weapon. So now with this build, you're going to have infinite frost armor, and then you're also going to have infinite damage bonus from collected action and your surge mods, which is just so strong. This build was already very strong. Them giving this build damage reduction just puts it over the top. I'm actually very concerned for how strong this build is going to be, especially when teams decide to run 2 or 3 of these guys. Very curious to see how this one plays out. For this build, I would highly recommend you build into resilience, then discipline, then put the rest into recovery. So our second build is the Striker Titan. Now, this build is getting nerfed a little bit, but it is still going to be very, very strong. So for the super, I would make sure you're running Thunder Crash, definitely by far the best super. And for our aspects, we're going to be running Knockout. Now, Knockout is getting nerfed a little bit with the health regen side of things. Instead of just triggering your health regen, it's just going to give you 30 HP, which is definitely a pretty hefty nerf. But 50 HP is still enough to survive like double melees and whatnot, and I still think it's going to be good. I don't think the health regen is going to be as crazy as it is now, which is good. It did need a little bit of a nerf, but being able to have that increased lunge distance and lunge melee damage is still going to be very, very strong. Then our second aspect is going to be Touch of Thunder, though this one is technically getting nerfed a little bit as well, just due to the lightning grenades getting a little nerfed. They're making it so that the jolt applies after they do the damage. So if you don't know how it works right now, currently the jolt will hit when the lightning grenade hits them, it will apply the jolt and then hit them with the damage. So that will make it so they will get jolted, hit with the damage, and then they'll chain out lightning, which makes it so you can get a ton of double kills and triple kills. Now they're making it so it does damage and then jolt. If you don't know how jolt works, a quick TLDR, if you hit somebody who's jolt, that will chain the lightning. Because the jolt is going to apply after the damage, they're going to have to get a hit again to do the chain lightning. So overall, definitely a hefty nerf to lightning grenades, especially when people are chained together. But overall, lightning grenades are still going to be very, very strong, and having 2 of them with Touch of Thunder is still fantastic. For our fragments, our first one is Spark of Instinct. This makes it so when you get critically wounded, you will emit a burst of arc energy that will jolt targets. This actually does a considerable amount of damage. With how close and personal you're going to be with the Striker subclass, this is just a no-brainer pick. Spark of Resistance is going to be our next fragment. This will make it so when 3 or more enemies are around, you'll get some damage reduction, as well as giving you plus 10 to your strength. With how aggressive the Striker subclass plays, this is actually going to be procced more than you'd think, especially in 6v6 game modes. Spark of Recharge, it will make it so when you're critically wounded, your melee and grenade energy will charge even faster. This is not a light buff. It actually makes them recharge really, really fast, making it so you don't really need to focus too much on your discipline or your strength that much. And then lastly, Spark of Feedback. Taking melee damage makes it so you do increase melee damage. So if somebody punches you, you punch them back, you do big damage, making it when this buff is procced with Knockout, it makes it so you pretty much just one punch people, as well as when you shoulder charge them, it will one punch them. Just super strong for how much you're going to be punching. For exotic choice, I have 2 for you. I think Dune Marches are very strong and the one I prefer personally, making it so you have increased movement speed, helping you get around in and out of cover, as well as being able to chain lightning whenever you punch somebody, making it so you can continue chaining your punches. And then Feedback Fences is the second pick that I think is also good, because making it when you're in the fray, if somebody punches you, you emit this burst energy and you can pretty much just one-tap people. Also makes it so you take less damage. I think Feedback Fences are going to be great for melee fights with the less healing from Knockout. Currently, I don't think they're the most needed, because Knockout will heal you enough typically to keep you alive, but due to the less healing, the Feedback Fences will be very nice and come into very clutch whenever you need a little extra damage reduction from enemies. For this build, I highly recommend you run Recovery and Resilience, and then dump the rest into Intellect. Then lastly, we have a Sentinel build, our Bubble Boy. And though this build is getting nerfed pretty hard because of the super, I still think it is very strong. Bungie is nerfing Ward of Dawn pretty hard, to the point where I don't think it's necessarily going to be that amazing anymore. I still think it will be okay, but it's not going to be super strong. So we'll have to see if Ward of Dawn is worth it, or if we just should switch to Sentinel. I think Sentinel is actually a very strong super and is a very underrated pick. Obviously right now Bubble is so much better, but if this class has to switch to using Sentinel, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. But onto our aspects, we're going to have Bastion. This is one of the best aspects in the entire game, making it so whenever you cast your super or cast your barricade, it will give you an overshield, and then your barricade will also be able to regenerate that overshield if you stand behind it. Having a 40 HP overshield is just stupidly strong, and as long as this aspect stays in the game, Sentinel will stay very competitive. Your second aspect is kind of a user's pick, depends on what you like. I personally like Control Demolitionist because it makes it so your abilities are a lot more lethal, and the Volatile also will heal you, but I could also see an argument for people who like to run all offensive Bulwark, making it so when you have an overshield, your grenade charges faster, and you get increased melee range and damage. Overall, both very strong picks. Personally, like I said, I prefer Control Demolitionist. For our fragments, you're going to run Echo of Expulsion. This makes it so whenever you defeat a target with avoidability, it will cause them to explode, as well as giving you a nice bump to your intellect. This makes it so you can get some pretty crazy double kills and triple kills, especially with Control Demolitionist. Echo of Leeching will make it so whenever you get a melee final blow, you will start your health regeneration for you and allies, plus giving you +10 to resilience, which Titans love resilience. This just adds an extra little survivability, being able to start your health regen whenever you're in the fray punching people. And depending on what you're doing, if you shoulder charge them, you'll get an overshield as well as starting your health regen, making it so you can get back into the fight very, very quick. Echo of Vigilance will make it so whenever you defeat a target while you are no shields, you'll get a void overshield. You're going to be proccing this almost all the time, anytime you win a 1v1, and this one just comes into clutch so often. One of the best fragments in the game. I love this thing. And lastly, we're going to be running Echo of Dilation. This will increase your crouch speed, making it so you can sneak around faster, and whenever you're crouched, it will give you enhanced radar. Overall, pretty nice buffs, but the main reason to use this one is it gives you increased 10 to mobility and 10 to intellect, just making it overall so you can get a lot of stats for free with these fragments. And then overall for this build for exotic, I have a few to recommend. Dune Marchers, just overall a great neutral exotic, making it so you can run around quicker. Chain some lightning with your melee, overall just fantastic. If you're an SMG player, Peacekeepers are great, obviously buffs up SMGs and makes them very, very strong. And then lastly, if you'd like something that's a little more off meta, but still very, very strong, Aeon Safe. And if you use the Sector of Vigor, it will make it so you will get class ability energy whenever an ally dies or you resurrect a target. Overall, just making this so you can get even more barricades, and this has no range, so if you're in 6v6, you'll get so many barricades through this thing. Not necessarily the most meta pick, but I think it is still a very, very strong pick nonetheless. And side note, it does say that you take reduced damage. This does not work in PvP. And then for this build, I would highly recommend building into Resilience, Recovery, then Intellect. And that is it. Those are 9 builds, 3 for each class that I highly recommend you have on the side for whenever you are going to be playing PvP in the new update. Even if it's prismatic, I would love to hear some of your theory craft. And just remember, if you did enjoy the video, please remember to like and subscribe, as it does help out with the channel a lot. I plan on covering all various sorts of builds in the new DLC, as well as some weapon reviews and all that fun stuff. We are really going to be pumping out the content this new DLC. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and you have a good rest of your day.